Hi there, welcome back to your favorite deep dive show on stories contemporary and consequential for India. This week I pick up three. Going by the events of past week, one is left wondering if the war between Russia and Ukraine has turned into a war between the United States and Europe. Let's unspool what's up in the Western theatre. And then back to our neighborhood, I look both to the west and the east of our borders, Pakistan and Bangladesh respectively. Is Balochistan inching towards a breakup from Pakistan? How long before it happens? Also, with Donald Trump saying that he leaves Bangladesh question to Prime Minister Modi during their joint presser in DC, is the game over for the Yunus regime in Dhaka? Let's get going. If one had to locate it, this was the moment when the U.S. Europe alliance came undone. The dialogue between the United States of America and Russia in Riyadh, the Saudi capital, and its outcome has multiple geopolitical messages. 1. Europe's decline is real. 2. Donald Trump's America would rather do business with Putin's Russia than its European allies. 3. For the same reason, Europe is no more an American protectorate. Europe cannot count on the United States to bankroll its security anymore. It's like a week that has shaken the world. Let's go through this in detail. Following his inauguration last month as president, Trump initiated a direct dialogue with Putin to negotiate an end to the Ukraine war, one of his campaign promises. A 90-minute phone call between the two on February 12 led to the Riyadh talks. This had many firsts since 2022, when Putin launched the war on Kiev. First time that Moscow and DC spoke directly. First time that Europe was not part of the dialogue. First time that even Ukraine was not in the room while its fate was on the table. First time that Saudi Arabia played such a prominent role. Interesting times indeed. The ball was set rolling hours before the Trump-Putin call, with U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth setting the contours of what was in their mind. End of American military and monetary support to Ukraine's war efforts. No NATO membership for Kiev. And no going back to pre-2014 territorial claims of Ukraine. Even before the talks, the Hegseth comments brought down the entire edifice of Europe's support architecture to Ukraine. He was speaking at a Brussels conference so that there was no ambiguity. Trump went on to his social media platform, Truth Social, to announce details of the phone call. It was not just about Ukraine, but obviously that was the elephant in the room or in the call. Kremlin had done its homework well. Putin quoted from one of Trump's stump speeches that what Ukraine war needed was an injection of common sense. A day before the phone call happened, Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, was already in Moscow and had secured the release of American citizen Mark Fogel. After the call, Trump also called for Russia to be invited back into G7 and expressed hope for an early meeting with Putin. Imagine, till weeks ago, nations like Brazil and South Africa and Israel were announcing that they will arrest Putin if he came to attend any multilateral conferences, since there was an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court against the Russian president. Now, Trump-Putin meeting is a near-future possibility. Then came the Munich Security Conference. Vice President J.D. Vance led from the front. It was the kind of hectoring on geopolitics that Europe has not seen from anywhere in recent memory. Let's listen to a clip from Vance's class in Munich.
See many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within.
Some European observers have called the Vance speech the opening salvo in U.S.-Europe divorce proceedings. Full of sarcasm, even scorn for Europe, the Vance speech heralded the retreat of America on its own terms. The atmosphere in Munich was described as that of a funeral by some observers. The end of a stable transatlantic alliance that provided global geopolitical stability. Vance's speech came out of a long-held conviction. Participating in the same conference last year, only as a senator, Vance had called for Europe to stand on its own 2 feet. From Munich, theatre shifted to Riyadh, where Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced a multipolar world with the United States only a first among equals. This is the end of American hegemony as we have known in the post-World War II world. Europe is left seething, reeling, even crying. Look at this. This is chairman of the Munich Security Conference, Christoph Huchsen, crying like a baby. This is representative of the shock European leaders are going through. They scrambled into an emergency meeting. UK's Keir Starmer announced his country was willing to put boots on the ground in Ukraine, only not knowing whether he would get the backing of his own parliament. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, effectively a lame duck, sought to rebuke Vance. A meeting of European leaders called for doubling down on support to Ukraine, irrespective of American support. But it is obvious Europe does not know from where the monies would come from. Whatever remained of the European resolve had a Trump wrecking ball coming. On Wednesday, the American president went into an all-out tirade against Zelenskyy, calling him a dictator, swindler, comedian, and asking him to quit. Irrespective of the reactions, this amounts to the end game for Zelenskyy. From his Vogue cover with his wife in the midst of war to his foreign accounts to the missing war aid money. He's under the scanner of the American state and might not be able to survive the Trump scrutiny. If Europe is finding itself pushed to margins of irrelevance, it has to look within. 3 serious efforts at peace happened in the last 3 years, from Turkey to Switzerland to Italy. But nowhere Russia was invited. On what moral grounds can Europe complain when the tables have turned? Vance's speech hinted at a larger malaise in Europe. Extreme protectionism combined with irrational wokeism have debilitated the once strong mercantilist tradition of Europe. Much of it European leaders already know. That's why, for example, EU commissioned the Draghi report, which we have discussed in earlier episodes of Get Me Right. Let me end this with some pop sociology. Like most of us, you would have watched your share of James Bond movies during your growing up years. An interesting pattern in the context of today's geopolitics is the number of Russian villains in those Bond movies. General Arkady Oromov in The Golden Eye to General Orlov in Octopussy. From General Georgy Koskov in The Living Daylights to anarchist Renat in The World Is Not Enough, to even female villains like Kesnia Onatop in The Golden Eye to Rosa Klebb in From Russia with Love. In fact, the latest Bond film that came in 2021, No Time to Die, went right into the Ukrainian theater of war to pick its enemy. Lucifer Safin is a cold and charismatic Russia-born villain. German and Chinese make up the second highest number of villains by nationality, with the sole Frenchman, Le Chiffre, working for Russian spy agency KGB, bringing it back to Russia. The point I'm making is that from its geopolitics to its movies, much of the Western world psyche is trained to be anti-Russian as a relic of the Cold War. Irrespective of his motivations, from deal-making to making America great again, Trump is giving an opportunity to the larger West to have a hard look at where it stands and where it goes from here. Moving to the second one.
दिल पे हाथ रखकर मुझे कहना पड़ता है, इंतहाई दर्द दिल के साथ कहना पड़ता है कि इस वक्त बलूचिस्तान के 5 से 7 अजला इस पोजीशन में हैं कि अगर वो आजादी का ऐलान कर दें तो अगले दिन अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा में उनकी दरख्वास्त को कबूल कर लिया जाएगा और पाकिस्तान को तक़सीम तस्वुर किया जाएगा.
Pakistani cleric Maulana Fazlur Rahman fired warning shots inside Pakistan's National Assembly on Tuesday, saying, as you heard, that parts of Balochistan, if not the entire restive province, were close to secession from Pakistan. He also said there was no writ of the government in southern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province and that there were pockets in his constituency where even the Pakistan army had run away. Hours after this comment by the senior politician, a massacre of 7 Punjabis was reported in Koh-e-Suleiman Mountains on the Balochistan-Punjab highway. The Baluch insurgents cornered a bus going from Quetta to Faisalabad, removed the passengers of the Punjabi ethnicity and gunned them down. This was not the first time the ethnic Punjabis have been targeted by Balochis in the ongoing insurgency. In the last 1 year alone, at least 70 Punjabi Pakistanis have been eliminated in similar targeted killings, with the Pakistan army becoming a special target. Just this month, on February 1, 18 of the Pakistani army soldiers were killed in a similar ambush. Why so? Baluchistan is Pakistan's largest province by area, 45% of the Pakistani landmass. It contributes to 40% of Pakistan's energy needs, provides 2/3 of its coastline and related economic activity, including the Gwadar port, and yet performs poorly on development parameters. Of the $300-odd billion of the Pakistani GDP, $220 billion comes from Punjab, with Balochistan share at just about $20 billion or 5% of the total. That's because while the province contributes immensely through its natural resources, economic activity is monopolized by the Punjabis, reflecting in the per capita GDP. While Punjab has over $2,000 of per capita gross domestic product, poorest Baluchis have about $1,100. Electrification stands at a paltry 18%, and overall poverty is as high as 70% against an average of 25% for the rest of Pakistan. For all these reasons, there's a strong resentment on the ground getting reflected in multiple insurgencies and rebellion against the Pakistani state. The latest round started in 2018. There have been bouts going back to 1948, then again in 1958 to 1960, 1963 to 1969, and in the 1970s as well. The Pakistani state hit back with the only language that it understands, that of brute force. Thousands of Baloch civilians have disappeared, never to return. What differentiates present insurgency, however, from the earlier ones is that while those in the past were led by Sardars, tribal chieftains, the latest round is grassroots up and has young, educated rebels who have more modern ideas of Baluch nationalism, thus making it more potent and sustainable. One such activist is Mahrang Baluch. She lost her father to ISI's machinations in 2011, and her brother was also abducted in 2017, though returned after some months. She spearheads a non-violent movement called the Baluch Yakcheti Committee and has become the face of peaceful Baloch resistance of the kind to which the Pakistani state, tuned to violence, has no answer. What's in it for India, as I always ask? Here's a nugget from history. Pakistan makes so much about the Kashmir dispute and the UN resolutions of 1948. Kashmir, in fact, had not declared independence. The Dogra ruler was only toying with the idea. But in the case of Balochistan, the princely state of Kalat, which effectively controlled much of Balochistan, had actually declared independence from Pakistan, and the Pakistan army forcefully annexed it in 1948. Such was the spirit of independence of the Khanate of Kalat that in 1911 the Khan did not join the chambers of princes in Delhi. At the time of partition in 1947, while the 560-odd princely states were clubbed as Category A under the political department, Kalat was clubbed in Category B along with Nepal and Bhutan under the External Affairs Department of the British Government of India. At a roundtable conference held in Delhi on August 4, 1947, just 10 days before independence, a standstill agreement was reached between Lord Mountbatten Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and the Khan of Kalat, that on August 15, Kalat would be an independent state. The agreement said in clear words, the government of Pakistan recognizes Kalat as an independent sovereign state. Separately, the British informed the rulers of Kharan and Lasbela that control of their regions had been transferred to Kalat state, and the Murri and Bukti tribal regions, which were under British control, were also returned to the Kalat fold, thereby bringing the whole of Baluchistan under the suzerainty of the Khanate of Kalat. And then came the British mischief, typical of those times. After doing all this, Mountbatten, who was fully party to the meetings, refused to sign a final order actualizing the decisions on the ground, thus leaving independence of Baloch state ambiguous. But despite this, as per August 4 agreement, the Khan declared independence on August 12, 2 days before Pakistan came into being. A bicameral parliament was set up with Darul Awan and Darul Umrah as the lower and upper houses respectively. Elections were also held immediately, and the Kalat State National Party came to power, winning 39 of the 52 seats. Mid-December 1947, the lower house of the Balochi parliament passed a resolution demanding relations with Pakistan as between two sovereign states through a treaty based on friendship and not by accession. On January 4, 1948, the upper house passed a similar resolution, rejecting resoundingly the accession of Balochistan to Pakistan. This house is not willing to accept merger with Pakistan, which will endanger the separate existence of the Baloch nation, said the resolution. Amid all this, the Nehru government committed the kind of strategic mistakes it had been committing from Kashmir to Hyderabad, from Coco Islands to Gwadar Port. There is enough documentary evidence to show that the Khan was interested in negotiations with India on the relationship going beyond independence. If push came to shove from Pakistan, the Khan thought merging with India was a better option than going with Pakistan. But the high horse on which Nehru government was on, it could not see beyond its nose. In a press conference on March 27, 1948, VP Menon publicly rejected the idea of Balochistan merging with India. The same night, Pakistan army invaded Kalat and annexed Balochistan. The Khan heard of Menon's condescending comments through an all-India radio broadcast and in dejection opened negotiations with Jinnah's Pakistan. Imagine this stupidity. Balochistan could have been part of India without debate or doubt, like Kashmir, but for the shenanigans of Pandit Nehru and his team. The Kohe-Suleiman attack of Tuesday was most probably carried out by the Baloch Liberation Army, the BLA. Then there is the Baloch Liberation Front and the Baloch Republican Army, to name some. The BLA's Majid Brigade conducts high-profile terror attacks targeting military and state infrastructure. Islamabad has doubled down. There is Chinese security presence behind the subterfuge of protecting its own assets along the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, including the Gwadar Port. Despite all this, secession risks would increase if Pakistan continues to go downhill economically. We have to wait and watch. Moving on to the next one.
There was no role for our deep state. It was. This is something that the Prime Minister has been working on for a long time and has been worked on for hundreds of years, frankly. I've been reading about it. But I will leave Bangladesh to the Prime Minister.
The message was unambiguous. The United States was walking back on its meddling in Bangladesh. It is going to be hands off from here on. Bangladesh is to be left to India as its geopolitical backyard. While this is one of the many positives that have come out of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's early trip to Washington, D.C., it is important to understand how this is going to pan out in Dhaka going forward. Let us look at the events of this week alone. Bangladeshi generals have met their counterparts from the ISI. The puppet regime of Muhammad Yunus, which now has lost the patronage of the U.S. deep state, has been engineering a political situation in Bangladesh to make it amenable for the return of the BNP, Bangladesh Nationalist Party of Khaleda Zia, to power whenever elections are held. Which is understandable because if the public sentiment played a role in ouster of Sheikh Hasina, then BNP is the only political alternative. All the cases against Khaleda in which she was charged or convicted of corruption, 5 at last count, have been taken back. The former Prime Minister has been ailing for a while and is presently undergoing treatment in London under the care of her son Tariq Rahman, who is also the acting chief of the party. Interestingly, in signs of political cunning, the Yunus regime has not absolved Rahman of all cases, which means uncertainty remains on whether both Khaleda and Rahman can return to Dhaka. Khaleda on grounds of health and Rahman due to the cases. Parallelly, Dhaka has been making some deft moves to make sure that the return of Sheikh Hasina becomes impossible. Not only the former Prime Minister's return, but even the participation of a party, the Awami League, is being made difficult through a vindictive judicial process to bar political activity by the deposed Prime Minister on grounds of law. Hasina faces over 100 cases from corruption to arson, from inciting political violence to even murder at last count. Even if she returns, she might face a long jail term. Despite that, she clearly wants to. Addressing party workers through a Facebook Live, she showed some political courage this week, calling Yunus a terrorist and making it clear that she would sure return to Bangladesh.
একটা মানুষকে পিঠে মারা কি সোজা কথা? এরা কি অমানুষ? এদের মধ্যে মনুষ্যত্ববোধ নাই? না, আমি সব ছবি দেখছি, তো আমি লাস্ট দেখছি, এটা প্রতিবাদও করছি। আমি তো এনকোয়ারি কমিটিও করে দিয়েছিলাম। আমি জজ সাহেবরে দিয়ে কমিটি করছিলাম যে তাদের মারছে এগুলি তো ইনকোয়ারি করা হোক। সে তো কাজ করতে দেয়নি। যে এখন যে ক্ষমতা আছে ইউনুস তো এই ইনকোয়ারি করতে দেয়নি, বন্ধ করে দিচ্ছে এবং তাদেরকে মাফ করে দিচ্ছে, দায় মুক্তি দিয়ে দিচ্ছে, এদের বিচার হবে না। কিন্তু আমি দেশে ফিরে এসে আইন করে তাদের বিচার করছি। ইনশাআল্লাহ এই হত্যারও বিচার আমি করব।
As per the constitution of Bangladesh, a caretaker government holds general elections, which the Yunus regime was supposed to do in the constitutional window of 3 months. But it's been over 6 months since the coup, and there are no signs of that happening. We have had some sound bites coming from Yunus himself and some of his advisors that the elections would be held at the right time. But it seems that the present puppet of the former US deep state has started enjoying his days under the spotlight and wants to delay the polls. What should be India's ask now that there is no American meddling? Let's be clear. Whatever happens inside Bangladesh is an internal matter for the Bangladeshis to handle as a sovereign nation. India only has some legitimate national security concerns which should be addressed. Last 6 months have seen some destabilizing consequences, particularly in India's northeast. The spiteful Yunus regime has let loose the radical elements which in the long term are going to singe Bangladesh, make no mistake, like Pakistan, but in the short term constitute a security headache for India to handle. I have focused on this aspect more than a couple of times in earlier episodes of Get Me Right. Let us look at the India ask one by one. First, the Yunus regime must announce a time frame for elections and stick to it. It cannot be a generality that whenever time is right, it would be done. The Supreme Court of Bangladesh should be able to impose a deadline if the country fancies its democratic institutions. There's an example from the past when Hasina and Khaleda came together to force the military regime of General Ershad to hand power back to an elected civilian government in 1990. It can happen again. 2. The elections should be inclusive with all political players allowed to participate. There is merit in the argument that Sheikh Hasina pushed the envelope beyond limit for public sentiment to turn against her on the ground. She was repressive and authoritarian. She should have allowed Khaleda Zia to get best medical treatment abroad and for the principal opposition party, the BNP, to breathe. 2 wrongs do not make a right, but. So while Sheikh Hasina can face judicial process as per the law of the land, her party must be allowed to contest elections. That would be the true test of the public sentiment against Hasina. Yunus should not fear that. 3. Sheikh Hasina should be allowed to return with safety of her life guaranteed. It is not about extraditing her from India, but to send her back to Dhaka and to not throw her at the mercy of a bloodthirsty mob. There was never a life threat to Khalida or to Yunus. The same should be extended to Hasina. 4. In a throwback to the Fazl-ur-Rehman days, Bangladesh foreign policy has swung towards Pakistan. That's bad judgment, to put it politely. As our earlier segment showed, Pakistan is on the brink of another 1971 moment when Baluchistan and even Khyber Pakhtunkhwa could break away on the grounds of similar treatment to minorities and others, as it happened in the case of Bengali nationalism, which led to the creation of Bangladesh. It would be foolhardy for Dhaka to pivot to Islamabad in the fond hopes that it can provide any kind of countervailing force against New Delhi. Let's not even get into the issue of morality here. 5th, and finally, the Yunus regime has played enough havoc with India's national security concerns already. This must stop, unless it wants an angry response. There's no trump card left in Washington, D.C., and Yunus can push the envelope only that far and no further. Thanks for watching.
इसको घर पे लगाओगे तो शादी का